Hello, I'm Hamish Cunningham. I'm from the Institute of Sustainable Food at the University of Sheffield. I'm really happy to be stood here with
me, Gareth Roberts, co-founder of Regather, partnership coordinator at Chef Food and collaborator with Hamish on the Mini Farm.
the Mini Farm. The Mini Farm's an urban farm right slap bang in the middle of Sheffield centre. I can see the town end of London Road down there. I can see Moorfoot over there. We're in the Lansdowne estate, one of Sheffield's big estates. And here's Regather just behind me. And we're actually stood in a garden called Club Garden. And I think Gareth can probably tell us why it's called Club Garden.
Thanks, Hamish. I can indeed.
I thought you could.
Here we are in the Club Garden, which is behind Regather and at the end of Club Garden Road. And the name Club Garden comes through history. So pre-industrial Sheffield, this was fields. This was the agricultural hamlet of Little Sheffield. The moor was a moor, a large open space with not much going on. And we've got then here in the Club Garden, fields and an agricultural economy. Subsistence food growing and workers, agricultural workers working the land and obviously supplying food to Sheffield, which was the town. Over by the castle. Should
we have a little aside about the Little Sheffield Feast? Because actually I remember 5 years ago, on the other side of this building, we had a little festival with actually music and people, which we were hoping to do today, but couldn't. And we had a model about this size. And we said we're going to spread urban farming across Sheffield city centre. And hopefully today we're going to see a bit of that.
Yeah.
But Little Sheffield and the Club Garden,
yeah.
It was an agricultural hub, wasn't it, a long time ago?
Yeah, and the Little Sheffield Feast, which, as Hamish said, you've talked about us doing it again. So that was a contemporary reimagining of a traditional event that went on every year seasonally for hundreds of years around about the Michaelmas date. And it was typically a kind of labour hiring fair. And through some local history research, which is how we found out all about the Club Garden and Little Sheffield, we found poems all about the Little Sheffield town feasts. And one of the main features, obviously you have an event, very large numbers of people in one area, you've got to feed them. So the arrangement apparently was that people from outside the city would bring food in and then they'd swap it for beer. And there began a long-standing tradition that is fair to say has continued to this day. So that was sort of pre-industrial Little Sheffield. Industrial Little Sheffield, characterised really by obviously the rapid industrialisation of the city's economy and its production base, and buildings such as ours, which we can see the back of, works buildings. So this was Horn Handle Works. But at the time, obviously, the Club Garden became the name of the road, okay? Because the Club Gardens were allotments, basically. So in that transition from pre-industrial to industrial Sheffield, there were a huge number of allotments here at the Club Gardens, and the name stuck. And then post-industrial Sheffield, we're going full circle, and it's all about feeding the city on our doorstep using the means available to us. And yeah, and that's really the main reason why Regather and the Regather team are so passionate about the Mini Farm and exploring all the different options available to urban agriculture and urban food production. And that's why we're involved, I guess.
Fantastic. And it's absolutely the best place to have this in the city, to start off what we hope is a programme of spreading urban food production around the place. So what we've done over the last year and a half or so, yeah, I have to be careful with the timescales because
2020 was a bit of a blip, wasn't
2020 sort of disappeared in a haze. I mean, talking about the city centre, Sheffield, I've lived here best part of 30 years now, and Sheffield feels a little bit different, as I suppose everywhere does, to how it felt a year and a half ago. And we're a tremendously lucky place to live. We've got the Peak District on our western side. It's a lovely, friendly place that, at least when I first came here, people called the village. But there's a tremendous amount of suffering and poverty and hardship in Sheffield as well, as there is across the country. If we take the use of food banks as an indicator for our national health, we're not doing terribly well. A decade of austerity has led to a huge demand for the most basic prerequisites for our existence, food. So we and a lot of other people are thinking harder and harder about how we can try and improve that situation. And we're talking today about the specific contribution that urban food can make, urban food production and growing food in the little unused spaces of cities. The big picture about agriculture is quite often about huge corporations that level massive fields across the Midwest or wherever. They use pesticides, they kill off all the wildlife, and it's all a bit of a nightmare. The soils get degraded by the use of, so we have to use fertilizers. Fertilizers are running out, yada, yada, yada. So what do? Well, it turns out there's actually quite a lot of places in cities like Sheffield where you can put in some additional food production. And we have techniques that are coming out of the laboratory and into practice now that can do that in a very sustainable fashion. And that's what the urban mini farm here is all about. And in a minute, what we're going to do is pop inside. You can see it behind us. We're just about finished. Gareth spent a happy month, well, it was probably a happy month, with a digger pushing aggregate from one side of that platform to another and back again. This is all underneath. This is all old, what was it? It was old housing, right?
Yeah, this is back-to-back housing and workshops that were demolished in the early sort of 1900s or thereabouts, and maybe a little bit later than that. But yeah, it looks like it's a lovely urban green space, and there are very few of them in this area particularly. And Regather's, since about 2010, when we first moved into the building, we've done various planting schemes and improvements, whether that's the edible hedgerows just to the side of us here, or the fruit trees that are around us. The little patch of wheat which is growing as part of the Sheffield wheat experiment just over to my left, which is standing nearly 4-5 foot tall now, and we're looking forward to harvesting that later in the year. So we're in an edible landscape, and for us at Regather, that's about being part of a more productive landscape for the city. And obviously food production is a really important part of making the landscape more productive. We're involved in regular community gardening sessions every Sunday here at the club garden. So members of the local community, particularly from the Lansdowne estate, joining us in creating raised beds and planting a whole range of edible foodstuffs. And as that food is ready to harvest, we're going to be cooking and eating as well as growing, and that will take us all the way through to September, all going well for the Little Sheffield Feast, which will see a return after a break, all going well, to a big street food feast, music and merriment. But with the mini farm playing a key role in producing foodstuffs for that. So a very exciting time, Hamish, to be introducing this as a new part to the Regather project.
And massively lucky to have a little bit of green space where we can grow vegetables, where the gardening team from the estate can grow vegetables. But obviously a lot of the places that we do have available in cities don't have that luxury. They don't really have soil available.
Yeah.
And indeed, if you go down underneath this soil, then there's quite a lot of old crap and rubble and so on from its past.
Not one for carrots.
Not great for carrots.
No,
true.
Or just roots, root vegetables in general.
Not great for carrots. But what we do have is a technology for growing without soil. And we've built a few of these in Sheffield. I think this is our 4th system now, to try and demonstrate how you can grow food intensively, how you can grow food all year round without access to soil. And we're using a technology called aquaponics to do that. We'll go inside and we'll have a look at an aquaponic system, which is just about complete now. But first I'll describe the concept behind the actual physical structure. We can't see it very well now. It's a bit overgrown at the front. We've still got the Heras fencing in and so on, but that's going to come off fairly soon. Maybe you can see a little better on this model. What we've got basically is a couple of shipping containers. So we've got a couple of shipping containers back to back like this. They provide a secure space, a sheltered space where we can control the environment for the fish that we grow, and where we can make sure that they don't get interfered with or anything of that sort. So the shipping containers are easy things to pick up relatively cheaply in an urban environment. I must say a huge thank you to Mark Parsons and the team at Studio Polpo, Sheffield's sustainable community architect, who did the design for us and indeed built this model. And it's really intended as something that you can drop into all sorts of different city environments and start growing food. So we used shipping containers, quite easy, quite cheap to get started, to provide a structure. And then we've got structures on the outside that Gareth built with the Regather team, which again was a huge amount of fun for him. He really appreciates the opportunity that we gave him to do that, I'm sure. And that's basically Perspex sheets over a wooden frame.
It was quite a stroke of luck, as well as deft skill with the whole team, really, because this site at the beginning of lockdown didn't have shipping containers or a mini farm on it. It actually had some marquees on that allowed us to create the capacity for packing our boxes to meet the level of demand, because we actually doubled our number of customers at Regather in less than a week, and we still managed to serve those customers. That was thanks to a bit of green space, some marquees, and some awesome teamwork from the Regather team and all of our suppliers as well. So once we'd managed to dismantle the marquee, because we'd sorted out inside the building and decommissioned the event space, took the stage down, built a 250 kilo goods lift, installed refrigerators, etc., etc. That meant that we could move the spare capacity that we created outside back in the building, which then freed up the site for building the mini farm. Then there was the process of planning permission, all the application paperwork. Again, Mark Parsons and the Studio Polpo team, couldn't have done it without them. The design work, structural engineers, grounds work inspections, and then dealing with the small matter of the hill, because that wasn't a flat surface. That was a little mound of post-industrial waste. Lots of bricks, huge lumps of concrete and bits of metal and goodness knows what else, all buried in the heap from the clearance of the structures that were on here. But through some quick learning, a 3-ton digger was involved, and a lot of sweat and tears. But we managed to reuse every single thing that came out of the ground back into the construction of the pad that the mini farm sits on. So lovely gabion cages with lots of house bricks are clearly viewable from other sides of the project, and and then working with Paget's, who helped us massively with lots of carrying and lifting of aggregates, and once that was all ready, we got the shipping containers in. That was fun as well. Some cranes and a few kind of like sharp intakes of breath when you're wondering whether it's all going to be level or not.
And they still are level. They haven't moved. They haven't moved an inch in all that time. So congratulations to the groundwork team.
Oh, that was me.
That was you.
Ah, thanks.
What else to say? Okay, so 2 Perspex growing chambers, one with some verticals in. They're not in place at the moment. This one we'll go and have a look at just in a few minutes. And this has a bunch of grow beds that use a conventional soil-free growing substrate. We're hoping a bit later on, this kind of green furry stuff over here is hopefully later on the foam substrate growing system that is being presented by Tony Ryan and colleagues at another event in this festival. So you'll hear a bit about that as well. Okay, I think we've probably covered the first part of our menu, and soon we're going to walk inside. So we'll probably cut at this point, I think. Cut.
You can't say to the audience, I think we'll cut it at this point.
That finishes the first part of our menu, and in a minute we'll walk inside and have a look at the technical stuff that we've just been talking about.
Hi Jill. Key question of urban agriculture is, can it grow enough food to feed a city?
It's a really good question, and actually the research that we've done at the University of Sheffield has really started to demonstrate the potential of urban horticulture, so growing fruit and veg within our city. So we've looked within Sheffield at the potential to grow fruit and veg for the population, and we used a sort of modelling approach, so looked at the available land that we could potentially grow food in. And when we start to scale that up, coupled to yields that we know people growing food across the UK get for typical staple fruit and veg crops, so things like potatoes, onions, apples, carrots, we project that actually within the city of Sheffield we could feed more than the population on their 5-a-day diet.
If we can grow enough food, if the land's available, what are the other limiting factors that we have to contend with in a city?
So I think when we say the land's available, the first step is, we understood how much green there is that could be used for growing food. But we don't know the ownership of that land necessarily. So for example, gardens are something, as I've mentioned, that we can shift to growing food. People can make that change themselves if they decide they want to, if they have a garden, if they're fortunate enough to have a garden. But the distribution of land across the city isn't equal. So not everyone has a garden that they can grow food in. So then we have systems like allotments. And we know during the COVID pandemic that allotment waiting lists have absolutely skyrocketed in response to people thinking and wanting to grow food. But there aren't enough allotments to go round. So things like growing in community gardens and exploring possibilities for things like micro farms are a really important part of what could be a future urban horticultural system. But there's a big challenge with that, because although we know that people want to grow food on allotments, we don't know whether they want to grow food in these other systems. And what we need to know is what would motivate them to grow food, what they perceive to be barriers to growing food, and how we engage them with it. 80% of the UK population live in cities and towns, and that really means that people are very detached from food production. They're detached from the soil, they're detached from where their food comes from, and that part of the really important and positive step with growing food in our cities and towns is really linking and making that connection back again in the future.
Wow.
Aquaponics, Gareth. You're one of the world's leading experts.
No, I'm not. You're going to have to tell me all about it.
Okay, I'll tell you about aquaponics. When we want to grow food in unusual places, places specifically that don't have good soils, then the kind of standard way of doing that now is hydroponics. And hydroponics is growing vegetables in water. It's a fantastic technique, it's very mature, very productive. And if you go and get your lettuce from Tesco's or your tomatoes from the co-op, then it's quite likely they've been grown hydroponically. There's a downside, and the downside really is the fertilizers. In order to grow hydroponically, we have to put fertilizers into water, dissolve them. We have to put the plants into a gross substrate like this. These are expanded clay balls. And we have to supply all those nutrients that the plants want through the fertilizers. And we also have to clean the water somehow when we get build-ups of certain chemicals and so on. Fertilizers come either from natural substances that we dig out of the ground, like potash. We've dug a lot of it up already, it's kind of running out. Or it comes from nitrogen fixation processes. And these are incredibly energy intensive processes. I believe it's something like 2% of the world's energy budget is currently devoted to that, to processes like the Haber-Bosch process, nitrogen fixation process, which creates the fertilizers which we can then use in things like hydroponics. So luckily there's a natural alternative to fertilizers, and we've got an example of them just down here. And what we have down here is a big fish tank, and the technology that we're putting into the Club Garden mini farm here at Regather is all about combining aquaculture with the hydroponics that I've just been talking about to make a different system called aquaponics. One of the most sustainable and low impact forms of agriculture that we have, because what we do instead of having fertilizers is that we just feed the fish. We host, in this case, some goldfish, actually koi carp, in our system. We feed them, they metabolize the fish food, and they produce ammonia. In those beds over there, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute, we encourage the cultures of nitrifying bacteria. They then translate the ammonia into nitrites and then to nitrates. And nitrates is plant food. So the plants that we have growing in those beds suck the nitrates out of the water. They clean the water, which comes back to the fish, and they get their nutrients from it. So the plants grow quickly, and the fish get clean water, and we have this kind of virtuous circle. Incredibly low impact, low environmental impact, and very efficient. So what's the catch? Well, the problem with aquaponics is complexity, and that's the main reason we believe why aquaponics hasn't spread as widely and as rapidly as hydroponics has. In aquaponics, we have to worry about 3 different organisms in a symbiotic ecosystem. So we've got the fish, we've got the plants. We haven't grown these in here. This basically didn't exist before this morning. This is from my allotment. Thanks, Anna. And we've got bacteria. The point behind this growing media is that it has a very large surface area. And on that surface area, all the little wiggly bits, all the little holes, we cultivate these bacteria. Well, actually, they cultivate themselves. You don't really have to do much. They just turn up and happily start metabolizing and changing the ammonia into nitrates. We have to keep them happy. We have to keep the plants happy. We have to keep the fish happy. I mean, this is a good thing for lots of reasons. It means that we can't use pesticides on the plants. The fish aren't going to like the pesticides. It means we can't use growth hormones for the fish. That's going to interfere with the plant metabolisms. And it means that we can't flush the water away in the way that hydroponic systems often flush water when they need to clean out. Because if we flush the water, we lose half our bacterial population. So it's good that we have this ecosystem, this symbiotic ecosystem, because it means that we end up with an incredibly clean growing process. It's basically an organic growing process, although in the UK the Organic Certification Authority is the Soil Association, and understandably they're not that interested in growing things in stuff that isn't soil. But yes, we have this lovely, clean, organic growing system, but it's complex. We have to keep all those things happy. So what can we do about that? And that's really the core of the research that we've been doing at the University of Sheffield now for a few years. And what we're trying to do is to use a little bit of automation and a little bit of knowledge sharing to address that problem of complexity. And we hope that as we do that, as we get that stuff to work in practical contexts like this, we can really show people how they can do it themselves. We can lead growers to a situation where they can use stuff like this just as easily as they use hydroponics. So we're using technology in 2 ways to try and help with this complexity problem. The first way is we automate as much as we can in the aquaponics system, using tiny little microcomputers, microcontrollers like this one. And this allows us to control things like water flow in the system. It allows us to keep track of the things like acidity, pH in the water, temperature. It allows us to track how much light is coming in and when we correlate that with things like how fast our tomatoes grow, we start getting a sense of what are the best things to grow in particular climatic conditions and so on. And all of this gets pushed into the cloud. It gets pushed out over the internet into databases running in data centers. And then that allows us to do the second thing, which is to support and to share knowledge between growers. So we have dashboards that will give you a view of what your system is doing today, and it'll also give you time series data about how your system and other systems like it have performed over time. So when you come in and test the water or look at the water levels on a Monday morning and they're going in a direction that you don't expect, it's relatively easy for you then, instead of having to pull out a big chemistry textbook and pore through it all and try and figure out what's going on, you go to your dashboard and you find similar examples from elsewhere and you find means for dealing with that problem and the little traces of carbonates or whatever, or eggshells or this, that, and the other that you might add to the system to properly buffer it. So we're hoping that when we have these systems that are coming from our laboratories, when we have them properly working in a practical setting, somewhere like Regather, in the middle of the city centre, somewhere that's easy for people to come and have a look around, then we can really make a massive step forwards in the adoption of this kind of sustainable food growing technology, and we can see more urban food getting grown across Sheffield and other cities. And that's basically the point. So Gareth, I'm about finished. I do need to say a couple of massive thank yous.
Indeed.
Well, first to Regather, but also to the Institute for Sustainable Food who fronted the bill, to Gareth Coleman of BitFixit and Growbotics, and to Pi Moroni, our helpers with the electronics. Thanks, folks.
I'd like to say a massive thanks to Hamish for making the project possible and all the team at the Institute for Sustainable Food, because in a global pandemic, the last thing you expect to be doing is growing fish and plants in a mini farm behind your community business. So massive thanks to you guys. Also really, really big thanks to Bryn, to all the team at Studio Polpo, Mark Parsons, various professional services that have had a role in making the project possible, to the council for granting the planning permission on the back of our use of the club garden space for over a decade. Really great to have those trusted relationships to do amazing projects. Thanks to Paget's, thanks to the digger hire companies who pulled out all the stops to make sure I didn't kill myself in a 3-ton digger, and thanks to the Regather team for putting up with all of this disruption all the way through lockdown and making it work at the same time.
And thanks to Ed Cartledge from Sort of Films for getting here on very short notice. And I think we've got time for questions.